So when you look at people in South Korea today, there's this, well, it's kind of a puzzle, isn't it?
It really is. On one hand, you hear all the time how genetically, homogenous the population is supposed to be.
Right, one of the most genetically uniform populations in the world. That's what the studies often say.
Exactly. But then you actually look, you spend time there, and you see this incredible range. It doesn't immediately scream uniform.
Yeah, like you see everything from really pale, almost porcelain skin tones,
Classic image.
right through to these beautiful natural golden tans. And hair, too, right? It's not just the stick, straight black hair you might automatically picture.
Definitely not. There's natural wave in there, sometimes quite subtle, but it's present. It's just visually diverse in ways you might not expect initially.
Which is exactly what we want to get into in this deep dive. We've looked at a whole range of sources.
Yeah, genetic studies, historical accounts, cultural analyses, market data.
And they all point to this core idea.
Yeah.
There's really no single fixed, typical Korean look. It's this complex mix.
Absolutely. It's ancient genetics meeting environment, meeting centuries of history, culture, aspirations, and even, quite starkly, politics shaping people's physical traits.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning then, the deep history. The genetic blueprint. Where did it begin?
Well, the consensus from the genetic studies we looked at points back thousands of years. The primary early settlers seem to have migrated down from Siberian regions.
Okay.
And then there was gradual mixing with groups coming from what's now northern China and Mongolia.
Right. So that combination created a distinct and, relatively uniform genetic base compared to many other regions.
It did, and that ancient foundation, that's the starting point. But what's really fascinating is how that base has been constantly interpreted, layered over, and sometimes, well, actively pushed against by culture and history.
Let's dig into that layering. Skin tone seems like a really obvious place to start because, as you said, the reality is more varied than the common perception, maybe driven by media.
For sure. Outsiders often get this image of uniform paleness, but the natural variance is wider. And that perception, that preference for paleness, it's deeply rooted in history, specifically class.
Ah, the historical class divide. Tell us about that.
For centuries, in Korea, like in many parts of East Asia, lighter skin was directly linked to the aristocracy, the nobility.
Because it meant you weren't working outside.
Exactly. Paleness signaled an indoor life, education, status. You weren't doing manual labor in the fields under the sun. Tanned skin, conversely, was the mark of the agricultural worker, the lower social classes. It was a very clear visual signifier.
And this isn't just perception. We actually have data, right? Melanin levels?
We do. Scientific studies have measured melanin index levels across East Asia, and they show these subtle but real differences. For South Korea, the average score came in around 32.5.
Okay, 32.5. How does that compare?
Well, for context, Japan's average was measured a bit lower at 28.9, so naturally lighter on average, and Thailand's was significantly higher, around 41.2.
So the Korean average is measurably darker than the Japanese average.
Correct. Which means if that historical ideal is extreme paleness, achieving it from the Korean baseline takes, well, more conscious effort, more intervention, you could say.
And that seems to connect directly to the market, doesn't it? That desire to maybe lighten or protect the skin.
Oh, absolutely. It fuels this enormous industry for sunscreen and whitening cosmetics in South Korea. We're talking big money. One source put the value at over $380 million in 2023 alone.
Wow. That's a lot of sunscreen and skincare.
It's a powerful economic engine driven, fundamentally, by that centuries-old class-based beauty standard.
But here's where it gets interesting today, right?
Yeah.
There's a pushback happening.
Definitely. Our sources really highlight this. Younger generations, you see it with athletes, certainly with K-pop idols, influencers. They're visibly challenging this old standard.
Embracing more natural skin tones. Or even tanning.
Both. Embracing their natural tone or even deliberately seeking a tanned, bronzed look, it's becoming a statement for some.
So it really forces a question, doesn't it? Should a national beauty standard keep reflecting these, frankly, outdated class distinctions?
Or is the cultural weight and maybe the economic inertia of that huge industry just too strong? It's a real point of tension in modern Korean identity. You see it playing out all the time.
Okay, so skin tone shows culture influencing what people might cover up or try to lighten. Let's shift to eyes. Because here, culture seems to intersect even more dramatically with choices about, well, physically changing features.
Right. And the first thing we need to do is tackle that big stereotype, the monolid.
The idea that all Koreans have monolids.
Which is just flat out wrong. We looked at a genome analysis from 2017. Pretty solid source. And it showed that somewhere between 20 to 25% of Koreans naturally do have a visible eyelid crease, a double eyelid.
So roughly 1 in 4 or 5 people, naturally, that's not rare.
Not at all, biologically speaking. And even with eye color, while dark brown is obviously dominant, there's natural variation. Maybe 10 to 15% show lighter brown, sometimes even amber hues.
Interesting. Any idea why?
Some geneticists suggest it might be more common in coastal regions, possibly linked to historical mixing through ancient sea trade routes, more gene flow.
But you can't really talk about eyes in Korea without talking about surgery.
No, you can't. The prevalence of double eyelid surgery, blepharoplasty, it's incredibly high. Some estimates suggest maybe 1 in 5 women in Seoul has had the procedure.
1 in 5, that's a staggering statistic.
It is, and it immediately throws you into that debate. Is this pressure from Western beauty ideals, or is it just personal choice in a place with accessible, advanced cosmetic surgery?
What do the sources suggest? Is it just one or the other?
I think framing it as a simple West versus personal choice binary is probably too simplistic. Most analyses suggest it's more complicated. Yes, maybe decades ago, Western influence was a stronger initial factor, but today, the pressure seems largely internal. It's become a self-perpetuating social norm within Korea. Well, think about it. If maybe 1 in 5 women around you has had it done, the procedure becomes normalized, almost expected in some circles, and the natural monolid starts to feel like the statistical outlier, visually.
Which then raises that deeper question. Does that kind of normalization start to erode appreciation for natural biological diversity? Is the social standard effectively overriding the biology?
It's a profound question about identity and where we draw the line between enhancement and conformity, maybe. And it connects to how physical traits aren't static anyway. Look at height.
Ah, yes. Height is a huge one. The change in South Korea over the last century is just phenomenal. It really shows how much non-genetic factors can shape us.
It's one of the most dramatic examples globally, so get this. Data shows that in the early 20th century, the average South Korean man was about 162 centimeters tall.
Okay, about 5 foot 4 inches.
Right, today, the average is around 174 centimeters.
Hang on, 174 centimeters is about 5 foot 8.5, so that's a gain of 12 centimeters.
12 centimeters, almost 5 inches. In roughly 100 years, that rate of increase is incredibly fast.
And this isn't like rapid genetic evolution. This is in environment.
Absolutely. It's a direct biological consequence of post-war economic development.
Yeah.
Better nutrition is the huge factor, especially more protein, more calcium during childhood and adolescence.
Plus better healthcare, sanitation, fewer childhood diseases, stunting growth.
Exactly. Economic stability literally makes people taller, generation over generation.
And this is where the political dimension becomes so incredibly stark, visually stark, when you compare South Korea to North Korea.
It's a really stark and quite tragic comparison. The average height for North Korean men today is estimated to be around 165 centimeters.
165, so that's a full 9 centimeters shorter than the average South Korean man.
9 centimeters. That's nearly 4 inches difference between two populations that were essentially genetically indistinct just, 70-odd years ago?
That divergence is astronomical in such a short time.
It really is. And researchers directly attribute that height difference, that stagnation or even reduction in North Korea, to chronic malnutrition, periods of famine, and specific nutritional deficiencies, especially impacting early childhood development.
It's biological evidence of political and economic divergence.
Precisely. It's maybe the most dramatic illustration possible that genetics only provides the potential. The environment, political, economic, nutritional, that's what ultimately shapes the outcome. It sculpts the human body.
Okay, so from that macro level, sculpting by politics and diet, let's zoom back into more micro level aesthetic choices. Hair seems like a good next step.
Sure. So the prevailing image, the standard, is straight black hair. But again, genetics tells a slightly more diverse story. About 15 to 18% of Koreans actually carry genetic variants for naturally wavy or even curly hair.
15 to 18%. Again, not insignificant.
Not at all. But historically, that natural wave wasn't always seen positively. There was even a derogatory term for it sometimes, jokeball hair.
Jokeball hair, what does that mean?
Jokeball is pig's trotters, or pig's feet. So calling wavy hair pig's foot hair was, pretty insulting.
What was the implication? Coarse, unruly.
Exactly. Coarseness, lack of refinement, maybe wild or untamed. It contrasted sharply with the ideal of sleek, smooth, silky, straight hair associated with propriety and neatness.
But attitudes towards natural texture are shifting now.
Thankfully, yes. Like with skin tone, there's more acceptance and even celebration of natural waves and textures now than there used to be.
But the bigger cultural conversation around hair seems to be about color, right? Dyeing.
Oh, definitely. The trend of dyeing hair, especially lighter shades, is huge. One recent survey we saw indicated that over 70% of South Korean women under the age of 35 have dyed their hair.
70%. Wow.
It's massive, and it brings up that same tension, heritage versus choice.
How so?
While some critics see it as maybe a rejection of their natural heritage, this move away from black hair, a kind of subtle cultural assimilation or erasure,
While others would just say,
that it's just fashion. It's personal expression, participating in global trends, the body as a canvas where you can play with color. It's that constant negotiation between your genetic inheritance and your cultural or personal choices.
okay, last major area, facial structure. This takes us back to the really deep evolutionary roots, doesn't it?
It does. Some of the features often considered typical things like, say, higher cheekbones, maybe more rounded jawlines compared to some other groups, a slightly flatter nasal bridge. These are often theorized as adaptations
Adaptations to what?
to the extremely cold, dry climates that ancestral populations migrating down the peninsula would have endured during the ice ages, features that might offer some protection against cold, perhaps.
Interesting. But even within facial structure, there's internal diversity. Not one single Korean face.
Absolutely not. Even within the peninsula, there's regional variation. Historically, some sources suggest people from northern provinces tended, on average, towards slightly sharper jawlines or taller noses. Whereas southern coastal areas, maybe due to more historical mixing with maritime traders from Southeast Asia or elsewhere, sometimes show softer facial contours on average. Subtle but noticeable regional tendencies.
And then, layered over all of this natural variation, we have to come back to cosmetic surgery again.
Yeah.
Because South Korea's reputation.
As the world's cosmetic surgery capital, yeah. It's undeniable. Estimates suggest over 1 million procedures are performed annually. It's a major industry.
Which just intensifies that tension we keep circling back to. Is it personal choice and technological empowerment?
Or is the sheer scale of it creating pressure and potentially eroding appreciation for the full natural spectrum of human features found within the population? It's a constant debate.
And how does all this connect to Korea's global image? The K-pop, the K-dramas.
That's a huge piece of the puzzle. K-media has exploded globally, but it tends to export a very specific, often highly curated and narrow aesthetic ideal.
You mean the pale skin, slim figure, maybe the sharp V-line jaw?
Exactly. That specific look gets amplified and becomes, for many international audiences, the image of Korean beauty. This creates what some call a representation gap.
Where global fans ask, why do all the stars look alike?
Right. And the response from within Korea is often, well, we don't all look like that. You're just seeing a very polished, marketed slice of reality that's designed for mass appeal.
So that gap, that tension between the narrow global image and the much more diverse internal reality, that's driving a lot of conversation.
Huge conversations, both globally among fans and critically within Korea itself, about identity, authenticity, and representation.
So bringing it all together, we started with this paradox, genetically quite homogeneous,
One of the most homogeneous major populations, yeah.
yet visually surprisingly diverse. And it feels like we've seen why.
I think so. All those inputs we discussed. The ancient migrations and climate adaptations, the historical class structures, the impact of political systems and diet, specific genetic markers for things like eye folds or hair texture, and then layered heavily on top, all these modern cultural choices and pressures.
It creates this constantly shifting mosaic.
Exactly. The paradox holds. Homogeneous base, but incredibly varied visual outcomes shaped by everything but genetics in many ways.
So the key takeaway for you, listening, is that the Korean look isn't one thing. It's not frozen in time from a history book, and it's not just the filtered image you might see in the latest K-pop video.
It's this dynamic, evolving story where biology meets society, history meets the present, and standards are constantly being debated, challenged, and reshaped, almost daily.
And if you found yourself surprised by some of this, maybe the height statistics or the sheer scale of the cosmetic surgery figures, or the historical roots of skin tone preferences, well, that makes sense because beauty and identity, they're never static. They're always in flux.
So maybe here's a final thought to take away. If a nation that is, scientifically speaking, relatively homogeneous like Korea, can display such significant visual variation driven mostly by culture, history, and politics, What does that suggest about the interplay between genetics and identity in our own societies, especially societies that are often far more genetically diverse to begin with?
Hmm. It really makes you question how much of what we perceive as innate or biological identity is actually shaped by our environment, our history, and our collective expectations. Something to think about.